For 15 years, my husband went to his beach house monthly. He forbade me from going. I need alone time. After he died, my son demanded, "We're selling that useless house." I agreed. Before the sale, I visited the property. When I opened the rusted basement door, I screamed, because what I saw there shattered my world. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm Verna, 68 years old, and I thought I knew everything about my late husband Louis after 45 years of marriage. I was wrong. It was a gray April morning, 3 weeks after we'd buried Louis, when Dean showed up at my kitchen table with his laptop and that look in his eyes. The same look he'd had since childhood when he wanted something from me. Except now, at 44, it wasn't candy or a new toy. It was money. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's properties." His fingers drummed against my yellow Formica table, the same nervous habit he'd inherited from his father. "The beach house is just sitting there, costing us $800 a month in maintenance." I set down my coffee mug, the ceramic clinking against the saucer. The coffee had gone cold anyway. Everything seemed cold these days. "Us?" "Well, you. But Mom, you can't afford to keep it. Your pension is only $2,100 a month, and this house already stretches that thin." Dean had always been practical, even as a child. While other kids played with toys, he counted his allowance and calculated how long it would take to buy bigger things. Louis used to beam with pride, calling him a natural businessman. I suppose that's why it hurt so much when Dean barely visited after his father's diagnosis, claiming his sales job kept him too busy to drive the 2 hours from the city. "Your father loved that place," I said quietly, tracing the rim of my mug with a finger that had worn smooth the wedding ring I'd worn for 45 years. "Dad's gone, Mom." Dean's voice was gentle but firm. And honestly, what did he even do there? Every month, like clockwork. Going to the beach house need to clear my head. He never invited us, never talked about what he did there. For all we know, he just sat around drinking beer and feeling sorry for himself. The dismissive tone in his voice made my chest tighten. Dean had never understood his father's need for solitude. Even as a teenager, he'd complained about Louis's monthly trips, especially when they conflicted with school events or family gatherings. He said he needed space to think, I murmured, remembering how Louis would pack his small overnight bag with the same methodical care he brought to everything. Clean shirts folded precisely, his leather shaving kit, always that worn paperback book he never seemed to finish reading. Think about what? Mom, face facts. We could sell it for at least $300,000 in this market. That's money you could use to fix this place up, maybe even move somewhere smaller and easier to maintain. I looked around my kitchen, at the wallpaper Louis and I had hung together in 1982, at the small herb garden outside the window that I'd tended for decades. Moving had never occurred to me. This was our home, our life. I should see it first, I heard myself saying. Before we sell, I should see what's there. Dean's expression shifted, just slightly. If I hadn't known him his entire life, I might have missed it. But I did know him, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face. Discomfort? Worry? Mom, there's nothing to see. It's just an old beach house. Dad probably let it fall apart anyway. Why put yourself through that? Because it was his place, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Because in 45 years of marriage, he never let me see what was so important that he needed to go there every single month. Dean closed his laptop with a sharp click. Fine, but I'm coming with you. I don't want you driving out there alone and getting all emotional. No. The word came out stronger than I felt. If I'm going to see his place, I need to see it alone. That afternoon, I drove the hour and 20 minutes to Ocean Drive, following the directions Louis had written down years ago, but never used to invite me along. The beach house sat at the end of a sandy lane, smaller than I'd imagined. White clapboard siding, blue shutters, a wraparound porch that faced the dunes. It looked peaceful, almost lonely. I used Lewis's keys, still on the ring with his car keys and the brass key to his desk drawer that I'd never been allowed to open. The front door stuck slightly, swollen from salt air, then gave way with a groan. The inside was immaculate. Not what I'd expected from a place where a man went to clear his head. The living room was furnished simply but thoughtfully. A comfortable reading chair by the window, bookshelves filled with titles I didn't recognize, a small kitchen stocked with basic supplies, everything clean, organized, cared for. But it was the basement door that caught my attention. It was tucked beside the kitchen, painted white like the rest of the trim, but secured with a heavy padlock that seemed out of place in this peaceful cottage. I found the key on Lewis's ring after trying 3 others. My hands shook as I worked the lock. It was rusted, reluctant, as if it hadn't been opened in some time. When it finally clicked open, I pulled the door wide and reached for the light switch. The stairs creaked under my feet as I descended into what I expected would be a damp, cluttered storage space. Instead, I found myself in a room that made my heart stop. The basement had been transformed into something between a living room and a shrine. Comfortable furniture arranged around a coffee table. Soft lighting from carefully placed lamps. But it was the walls that made me gasp. Photographs. Dozens of them, professionally framed in matching silver frames. All of the same woman. She was beautiful in the way I had never been. Young, maybe in her 30s, with honey-colored hair and a smile that seemed to light up every picture. Some photos showed her alone, laughing at something outside the frame. Others showed her with a child, a little boy with Lewis's distinctive cleft chin and serious eyes. I sank into the nearest chair, my legs unable to hold me anymore. This wasn't just a secret. This was a life, a whole other life that Lewis had been living every month when he came here to clear his head. On the coffee table, I found a stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon. My fingers trembled as I untied it and opened the first envelope. The handwriting was Lewis's, but softer somehow, more careful than the grocery lists and birthday cards he'd written to me. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "Coming to see you and Marcus is the only thing that keeps me sane. I count the days until I can hold you both again, until I can be the man I was meant to be instead of the one trapped in that other life." I dropped the letter as if it had burned me. Sarah, Marcus. Names that meant nothing to me, but apparently everything to Lewis. There were more letters, more photos, pictures of birthday parties I'd never attended, Christmas mornings that had happened without me. The little boy, Marcus, growing older in the frames, from toddler to what looked like a young man in his 20s. How long had this been going on? How many years had Lewis been living this double life while I waited at home, wondering why he seemed so distant after his monthly trips? I found a calendar on the small desk in the corner, marked with dates and notes in Lewis's handwriting. Sarah's birthday, flowers ordered. Marcus's graduation, arrange time off. Anniversary dinner, make reservation at Giuseppe's. Anniversary. They had an anniversary. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. I climbed the stairs on unsteady legs, desperate to get out of that room, out of that house, away from the evidence that my entire marriage had been a lie. But as I reached for the front door, my phone rang. Dean. "Mom, how's it going out there? Find anything interesting?" I stared back toward the basement door, at the secrets Lewis had kept locked away. "No," I heard myself saying. "Nothing interesting at all." "Good. So we can list it next week?" I closed my eyes, seeing again those photos. That beautiful woman, that child who had Lewis's eyes and smile. "Yes," I whispered. "We can list it." But as I hung up the phone, I realized I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly what Lewis had done to me, to us, to the life I thought we'd built together. I locked the front door and drove home in a daze, my mind spinning with questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. But one thing was certain. I would be going back to that house, to that basement, to find out just how completely my husband had betrayed me. What I didn't know yet was that the beautiful woman in the photos wasn't the worst part of Lewis's secret. The worst part was who else knew about her. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's smile, that little boy's face, the careful way Lewis had arranged those photographs like precious treasures. By 5 a.m, I gave up on rest and made coffee with hands that still trembled. Dean called before 7. "Mom, I've got the realtor coming by at 11 to look at the beach house. Can you meet us there?" "No," I said quickly. Too quickly. "What do you mean, no? Mom, we agreed." "I need more time to go through Lewis's things. There might be important papers, insurance documents." The lie came easily, surprising me. When had I learned to deceive my own son? "Fine, but make it quick. Every day we wait is money down the drain." After Dean hung up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at Lewis's keyring. Such a small thing to hold such enormous secrets. I thought about calling Dean back, telling him what I'd found, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the need to understand the full scope of my husband's betrayal before I admitted to my son that I'd been a fool for 45 years. By 8:30, I was driving back to Ocean Drive. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dunes, and the beach house looked different in the light. More welcoming somehow, as if it were eager to share its secrets. This time, I went straight to the basement. The photograph seemed even more painful in daylight. Sarah's beauty was undeniable. But it was more than that. In every picture, she looked genuinely happy. Not the careful smile I'd perfected for family gatherings, but pure joy. The kind of expression I couldn't remember having in years, maybe decades. I forced myself to sit down and read the letters properly this time. The first one was dated March 3rd, 2008, 15 years ago. I would have been 53 then, still working part-time at the library, still believing that Lewis's monthly trips were about his need for solitude after stressful weeks at the insurance office. "My dearest Sarah," Lewis had written in his careful script, "I can't stop thinking about yesterday, watching you with Marcus in the garden, the way you laugh when he tries to help you plant those tomatoes. You make everything beautiful, even the simplest moments. I wish I could give you more than these stolen weekends. You deserve so much better than a man who can only offer you fragments of himself." My throat closed. Lewis had never written to me like that. Our communication had been practical, functional. Pick up milk. Doctor appointment Tuesday. Happy anniversary, written in store-bought cards with pre-printed sentiments. The next letter was from 6 months later. "Sarah, darling Sarah. Marcus took his first steps yesterday, and my heart nearly burst watching him walk toward you with that determined little frown. He has your stubborn streak and my grandmother's chin. Sometimes I look at him and see the man I could have been if I'd made different choices 20 years ago. But then I remember that without those choices, I never would have found you, never would have had this perfect little family." Perfect little family. The words hit me like a slap. What did that make Dean and me? The imperfect family he was stuck with? I kept reading, and with each letter the picture became clearer and more devastating. Lewis hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been living a complete alternate life. Sarah wasn't his mistress. She was his partner, his love, the mother of his child. Marcus wasn't an accident. He was wanted, celebrated, adored. In letter after letter, Lewis wrote about birthday parties he'd planned for Marcus, bedtime stories he'd read, scraped knees he'd kissed. All the things he'd done for Dean once, but that was 20 years ago, when Dean was small and Lewis was still young enough to believe in fatherhood. But it was a letter from 2020, just 3 years ago, that made me understand the true depth of his deception. "My darling Sarah," it began, "I know you're frustrated with our situation, and you have every right to be. Marcus is 21 now, a man, and he deserves to have a father who can acknowledge him openly. You've been patient for 12 years, waiting for me to find the courage to leave Verna. But I keep postponing the conversation. I know it seems like cowardice, and perhaps it is. But Verna is getting older, and despite everything, I can't bring myself to abandon her completely. She's done nothing wrong except marry a man who was already broken. Already broken. Is that how he saw himself when he married me? I thought back to our wedding day. How handsome he'd looked in his navy suit. How my heart had raced when he slipped the ring onto my finger. Had that all been a lie, too? The letter continued. I've made a decision. I'm going to ensure that you and Marcus are taken care of when I'm gone. Verna will have the house and my pension, but everything else, the investments, the beach house, the savings account she doesn't know about, will come to you and Marcus. You are my real family, the life I chose rather than the one I inherited. Marcus is my son in every way that matters, and I want him to have the future I can't give him now. I read that paragraph 3 times before it sank in. Lewis had planned to leave his entire estate to Sarah and Marcus. Not just the beach house, but everything. While I sat at home clipping coupons and worrying about the mortgage payments on our house, Lewis had been squirreling away money for his secret family. But how much money? I thought of our joint checking account, the modest savings account with $17,000, the life insurance policy that would pay off the house. Lewis had always handled our finances, said it was too complicated for me to worry about. Now I wondered what else he'd hidden. I searched the desk drawers and found a manila folder labeled Important Documents. Inside were bank statements for an account I'd never heard of. Pacific Coast Trust. The balance made my vision blur. $1,200,000. $1.2 million. While I'd been rationing groceries and wearing the same winter coat for 6 years, Lewis had been secretly accumulating a fortune. There were more documents, investment portfolios, stock certificates, even a copy of a will that left everything to Sarah Chen and Marcus Chen, my chosen family. Chen. They had a last name now, a reality beyond the photographs. I wondered if Marcus knew about me, about Dean, about the wife his father had kept like an inconvenient secret. My phone rang, startling me so badly I dropped the papers. It was Dean again. Mom, where are you? The realtor is here and she wants to see inside. I'm at the house, I said, stuffing the documents back into the folder. I'll be right up. What do you mean, you'll be right up? Where in the house are you? I looked around the basement, at the shrine to Lewis's real life, at the evidence that my entire existence had been a convenient fiction. Just going through some old storage boxes. Give me 5 minutes. Make it fast. Mrs. Rodriguez has 3 other appointments today. I climbed the stairs on shaking legs, locked the basement door, and composed myself before opening the front door to find Dean standing beside a professionally dressed woman who looked like she could sell sand to a beach. Mrs. Patterson, so nice to meet you. I'm Elena Rodriguez. She shook my hand with the enthusiasm of someone who saw commission dollars in every handshake. Your son tells me you're ready to let this little gem go. I have to say, properties like this are selling within days in the current market. I nodded mutely, barely hearing her chatter about square footage and ocean views. Dean walked through the house with proprietary confidence, pointing out features to Mrs. Rodriguez as if he knew the place intimately. But I noticed he didn't go near the basement door, didn't even glance in that direction. What's down there? Mrs. Rodriguez asked, noticing the door I'd been trying not to look at. Just storage, Dean said quickly. Nothing interesting. Mom, didn't you say the water heater needs work? It was a lie. I'd seen no water heater in that basement, just Lewis's secret shrine to his other life. But Dean's quick deflection raised a question that made my stomach clench. How much did my son know about his father's double life? I'll need to see the basement for the listing, Mrs. Rodriguez said practically. Buyers want to know about storage space, utilities, potential for renovation. I don't have the key with me, Dean said smoothly. We can schedule another time. Another lie. The key was on Lewis's ring, which I had in my purse. Dean knew I had those keys, which meant he knew exactly what was in that basement and wanted to make sure Mrs. Rodriguez didn't see it. Actually, I heard myself saying, I do have the key. Dean's face went white. Mom, we don't need to— It's fine, I said, pulling out Lewis's key ring. Let's show Mrs. Rodriguez everything. The lock was easier this time, as if it had remembered my touch. I led Mrs. Rodriguez down the stairs, my heart pounding, waiting for her reaction to Lewis's secret sanctuary. But when we reached the bottom, Mrs. Rodriguez just nodded approvingly at what looked like an ordinary basement family room. Comfortable furniture, good lighting, nothing remarkable. The photographs were gone. The letters, the documents, the calendar. All of it had vanished. Nice space, Mrs. Rodriguez said, making notes. Finished basement definitely adds value. I stared at the blank walls, the empty coffee table. Someone had stripped away every trace of Sarah and Marcus, every piece of evidence that Lewis had lived a secret life. The only question was when and who had done it. Dean was quiet during the drive home, but I could feel his relief rolling off him in waves. Finally, as we pulled into my driveway, I turned to face him. You've been here before, I said. It wasn't a question. He kept his hands on the steering wheel, looking straight ahead. Mom, how long have you known about Sarah and Marcus? For a moment, I thought he might keep lying. Then his shoulders sagged, and 44 years of my son's life fell into place like puzzle pieces I'd been trying to force into the wrong picture. Since I was 20, he said quietly. Dad told me when I got serious about Jennifer. Said it was time I understood that sometimes men make choices they have to live with. 20. Dean had known about his father's secret family for 24 years, which meant every holiday, every anniversary, every time I'd wondered why Lewis seemed distant after his beach house trips, Dean had known the truth. Did you help him hide the money too? Dean finally looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw something that chilled me more than all of Lewis's letters combined. Pity. Mom, he said gently. What money? Dean's question hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. What money? He'd asked, as if he genuinely didn't know about the $1.2 million hidden in Pacific Coast Trust. But I'd seen the bank statements, held them in my own hands just hours ago. The account at Pacific Coast Trust, I said carefully. $1.2 million. Dean's eyebrows rose in what looked like genuine surprise. Mom, there's no account like that. Dad's estate was pretty simple. The house, his pension, and about $20,000 in savings. The lawyers went through everything. I stared at my son, searching his face for signs of deception. Dean had always been a terrible liar as a child. When he broke my favorite vase at age 8, his guilt was written across his features like headline news. But now, at 44, he looked genuinely confused. I saw the statements, I insisted. Bank documents, investment portfolios, all with Sarah and Marcus's names on them. Mom. Dean's voice carried that careful tone people use when they're worried about someone's mental state. Are you sure you saw what you thought you saw? You've been under a lot of stress since Dad died. Sometimes grief can make us see things, imagine things that feel real. The condescension in his voice sparked something hot and defensive in my chest. I'm not senile, Dean. I know what I saw. I believe you think you saw something. But Mom, if Dad had that kind of money hidden away, don't you think I would have known? I helped him with his finances the last few years when his arthritis got bad. I know every account, every investment. But even as Dean tried to convince me I'd imagined it all, I noticed he didn't deny knowing about Sarah and Marcus. He'd admitted to that truth easily enough. Why lie about the money? Take me back to the house, I said. Mom, we just left. Take me back, Dean. Now. The drive back to Ocean Drive was silent and tense. Dean kept shooting worried glances at me, probably planning how to gently suggest I see a doctor about my confusion. But I wasn't confused. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd held in my hands. The beach house looked exactly the same as we'd left it an hour earlier, but something felt different. When I unlocked the front door, the air smelled wrong. Not just the usual salt and pine, but something else. Something recent. Human presence. I went straight to the basement door. Dean followed reluctantly, his footsteps heavy on the stairs behind me. The basement was exactly as we'd left it after Mrs. Rodriguez's visit. Clean, ordinary, empty of any evidence of Lewis's secret life. But now I was looking more carefully. The walls had been recently painted. I could smell the faint chemical tang of fresh paint under the basement mustiness. The furniture was positioned to cover electrical outlets, as if someone had needed to access them recently to remove fixtures. "See?" Dean said behind me. "Just storage space." But I was examining the coffee table where I'd found the letters. When I looked closer, I could see faint outlines in the dust where picture frames had been sitting. Someone had cleared this room, but they'd done it recently. Very recently. "Who else has keys to this house?" I asked. Dean hesitated. "Just us, as far as I know." "Dean," I turned to face him, "I need you to tell me the truth, all of it." My son stood at the bottom of those basement stairs looking like the 8-year-old boy who'd broken my vase, guilty and cornered. Finally, he sighed. "Dad gave Sarah a key years ago. But Mom, she's not. She's not a threat to you. She loved Dad, and he loved her. But that doesn't take anything away from your marriage." The casual way he said it, as if adultery were just another lifestyle choice, made my hands clench into fists. "It doesn't take anything away?" "Dean, your father lived a double life for 15 years. 20, Dean corrected quietly. "It was 20 years, Mom. 20 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. Not 15. 20. Which meant Sarah hadn't been some midlife crisis. She'd been Lewis's real relationship, his chosen family, almost from the beginning of the new millennium. "And you were fine with this?" Dean ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father it made my chest ache. "I wasn't fine with it. I was 20 years old when Dad told me. What was I supposed to do? Destroy the family?" "The family was already destroyed. Your father destroyed it the moment he started lying to me." "Dad never lied to you," Dean said, and the defensive tone in his voice told me whose side he'd chosen long ago. "He just kept parts of his life separate. You were happy, Mom. You had your routines, your friends at the library, your garden. Dad never took any of that away from you." "Because I didn't know what he was taking." The words came out louder than I'd intended, echoing off the basement walls. I didn't know I was living a half-life while he gave his whole heart to someone else. "Sarah made him happy," Dean said simply. "Happier than I'd ever seen him. And Marcus." Dean's voice softened. "Marcus is my brother, Mom. My little brother. He's a good kid, smart, funny. He's finishing college, wants to be a teacher. Dad was so proud of him." The way Dean talked about Marcus with genuine affection and pride made something crack inside me. My son had a relationship with his half-brother that I'd never even known existed. They'd shared family dinners I'd never been invited to, conversations about a future I'd never been part of planning. "Where is the money, Dean?" "Mom, I told you. Don't lie to me anymore." I kept my voice level, but I could hear the steel underneath. I saw the bank statements. I saw Lewis's will leaving everything to Sarah and Marcus. "Where is it?" Dean was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad changed his mind." "What do you mean?" "About leaving everything to Sarah and Marcus. He changed his mind in the last year of his life. He said he couldn't do that to you. Couldn't leave you with nothing. So he redistributed things." "Redistributed how?" Dean looked up at me with eyes that held too much knowledge, too many secrets carried for too long. He gave most of the money to Sarah and Marcus while he was still alive. Set Marcus up with a college fund, helped Sarah buy a house. By the time he died, there really wasn't much left except what went to you. The practical, businesslike way Dean explained the dismantling of our family's financial security made me feel dizzy. How much? Does it matter now? How much, Dean? He closed his eyes. About $800,000 over 3 years. $800,000. While I'd been worried about the cost of Lewis's medications, while I'd been putting off replacing our ancient washing machine, while I'd been buying generic groceries to stretch our budget, Lewis had been giving away nearly $1 million to his secret family. And you knew about this. He asked me to help with some of the transfers. Said it was important that Sarah and Marcus were taken care of. What about me? What about taking care of me? You had the house, the life insurance, his pension. Dad thought that would be enough. Enough. Lewis had decided what would be enough for me without ever asking what I needed or wanted. He'd made financial decisions that would affect the rest of my life without even consulting me. There's something else, Dean said reluctantly. Someone you need to meet. Before I could ask what he meant, I heard footsteps on the stairs above us. 2 sets of footsteps coming down toward the basement. The first person to appear was a woman about my age, but that's where any resemblance ended. She was elegant in a way I'd never managed, even in my younger days. Silver hair cut in a sleek bob, expensive clothes that fit perfectly, confident posture that spoke of a life well lived. But it was her face that made my breath catch. Even 20 years older, she was unmistakably the woman from the photographs. Behind her came a young man who looked so much like Lewis at 25 that for a moment I thought I was seeing a ghost. The same dark hair, the same serious eyes, the same way of standing with one shoulder slightly raised. "Hello, Verna," the woman said, and her voice was warm, musical, nothing like the harsh tones I'd imagined. "I'm Sarah Chen, and this is Marcus." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. For 20 years, these people had been abstractions, threats to my marriage that existed only in my imagination. Now they were real, standing in Lewis's secret basement, looking at me with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "I know this is difficult," Sarah continued. "Dean thought it would be better if we met face to face rather than continuing to avoid each other." "Avoid each other?" My voice came out as a croak. "I didn't even know you existed until yesterday." Sarah's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise. She glanced at Dean. "She doesn't know?" "Know what?" I demanded. Marcus stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice was deeper than I'd expected but still carried Lewis's precise way of speaking. "Mrs. Patterson, we're not here to take anything from you. We're here because Dad left instructions for after his death. Instructions about how to handle the transition." "What transition?" Sarah opened a leather folder she'd been carrying and pulled out a thick envelope. "Lewis wrote this letter to be given to you 6 months after his death. He wanted to make sure you'd had time to grieve before you learned about us." She held out the envelope, and I saw my name written across it in Lewis's handwriting. Below my name, in smaller text, "To be opened only in the presence of Sarah, Marcus, and Dean." "He planned this," I whispered, taking the envelope with numb fingers. "Even after he was dead, he was still controlling how and when I learned the truth." "He loved you," Sarah said quietly. "In his way, he really did love you. But he loved us too, and he wanted to make sure everyone was taken care of." I looked at the 3 faces watching me, Dean with his familiar guilt, Sarah with her careful compassion, Marcus with his inherited seriousness, and realized that whatever was in Lewis's letter, it wasn't going to be good news for me. But I was done being protected from the truth. I was done having my life planned and managed by people who thought they knew what was best for me. I tore open the envelope and began to read the final betrayal my husband had planned from beyond the grave. Lewis's final letter was written in the same careful handwriting I'd seen on grocery lists and anniversary cards for 45 years, but the words on the page might as well have been written by a stranger. "My dear Verna," it began, "if you are reading this, then Sarah and Dean have followed my instructions, and you are learning the truth I never had the courage to tell you while I was alive. I know this must be painful, and for that, I am truly sorry. But I believe it is time for honesty, even if that honesty comes too late." I could feel the three of them watching me as I read, but I forced myself to continue. "By now you know about Sarah and Marcus, about the life I built with them over the past 20 years. I won't insult you by calling it a mistake or asking for your forgiveness. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, and one I would make again. Sarah gave me something I had forgotten I needed: passion, understanding, a sense of possibility. Marcus gave me the chance to be the father I never was to Dean, to start fresh and do better. The casual cruelty of those words hit me like ice water. He regretted nothing. After 45 years of marriage, after building a life together, raising Dean together, growing old together, Lewis regretted nothing about his betrayal. I know you will wonder why I stayed married to you if I found such happiness elsewhere. The truth is, I stayed because it was easier than leaving, and because despite everything, I did care about you. You deserved better than abandonment, even if you also deserved more than half a husband." Half a husband. Is that what I'd had all these years? The leftover pieces of a man whose heart belonged to someone else? I have tried to arrange things so that everyone I love will be taken care of. Sarah and Marcus have their house, Marcus has his education funded, and Sarah has enough to live comfortably. You have our house, my pension, and the life insurance policy. But there is one more thing I need to tell you. One final arrangement I have made. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the letter steady. Beside me, I could hear Dean shifting nervously, and I knew whatever was coming next would be the worst of it. The beach house will not be sold. It belongs to Sarah and Marcus now, legally transferred to them 3 months before my death. It is their inheritance, their piece of the life we built together. But more than that, it is where Sarah plans to live now that there is no reason for secrecy. I looked up sharply at Sarah, who was watching me with something that might have been pity. "You're moving here?" "I already have," she said softly. "Last month. The apartment in the city was too expensive, and this place. It holds so many memories of Lewis. I want to be near them." "It's beautiful here," Marcus added, and there was genuine enthusiasm in his voice. "Quiet, peaceful, great place for Mom to write." "Write?" "Sarah is a novelist," Dean said, speaking for the first time since the letter reading began. "She's published 4 books. Dad was so proud of her work." Published novels. Another piece of Sarah's life that was more accomplished, more interesting than anything I had ever done. While I'd been checking out library books and tending my small garden, Lewis's real partner had been creating art, building a career, living a full and meaningful life. I looked back at the letter. I hope that in time, you and Sarah might find some way to coexist peacefully. You both loved me in different ways, and I loved you both. Dean has agreed to help facilitate this transition, and I trust him to handle any difficulties that may arise. I know this is not the ending you might have chosen for our marriage, Verna, but it is the one that allows everyone to move forward with dignity. Dignity. Lewis thought there was dignity in being replaced, in discovering that your entire adult life had been a performance for an audience of one while the real show happened elsewhere. There is one final gift I want to give you. In the safety deposit box at First National, you will find the deed to a small property in Arizona, near your sister Margaret. It is paid for, ready for you to begin fresh if you choose. I thought you might want to be closer to family who actually knows and loves the real you. The real me. As if Lewis had any idea who that was after 45 years of lying to me. I set the letter down with hands that felt disconnected from my body. The basement was completely silent except for the sound of my own breathing and the distant crash of waves against the shore. Arizona, I said finally. It's a nice little place, Dean said quickly. I helped Dad find it. 2 bedrooms, a small yard, close to Aunt Margaret's retirement community. You'd have your pension, and the cost of living is much lower there. You've seen it. We all have, Sarah said gently. Louis wanted to make sure it was perfect for you. He flew out with Dean and Marcus last year to look at it. All of them. My husband, my son, and his secret family had taken a trip together to find a place to send me. They'd walked through what was supposed to be my new home, probably discussing how to break the news to me, how to manage my reaction, how to make their betrayal seem like kindness. When were you planning to tell me about this arrangement? I asked. The letter was supposed to be given to you last month, Marcus said. 6 months after Dad died. But Dean thought, well, he thought you might need more time to adjust. Adjust to what? To the idea of sharing Dad's legacy, Dean said carefully. To understanding that his love wasn't exclusive, sharing. As if love were a pie that could be divided into neat slices, as if the fact that Louis had loved Sarah more didn't mean he'd loved me less. How long have you 3 been planning this together? I asked. It's not like that, Mom, Dean started, but Sarah held up a hand. It's exactly like that, she said, and I was surprised by her directness. Louis asked Dean to help coordinate things, and Marcus and I have been working with Dean to make sure the transition would be as smooth as possible. We all want what's best for you. What's best for me? I stood up slowly, my knees protesting after sitting in that basement for so long. And what you think is best for me is to disappear to Arizona so you can all live happily ever after in the house I helped pay for 15 years. Verna, Sarah said, and there was genuine concern in her voice. This doesn't have to be adversarial. We could be friends. We could support each other. We both love the same man. No, I said, and my voice came out stronger than I felt. We didn't love the same man. You loved the real Louis, the one who chose you and planned a future with you and traveled across the country to find you a place to live. I loved a fiction, a husband who existed only when you weren't around. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Patterson, Dad really did care about you. He talked about you all the time, about how good you were, how patient. Patient, I repeated, like a well-trained dog. That's not what he meant, Dean said quickly. Mom, you're upset, and I understand why. But this doesn't have to be the end of the world. You could have a fresh start in Arizona. Aunt Margaret would love to have you closer. You could make new friends, find new interests. New interests. I looked around the basement that had been Louis's shrine to his real life, at the 3 people who had conspired to manage my future without my input. What if I don't want a fresh start? What if I want to stay right here and fight for what's mine? This house isn't yours, Sarah said, and for the first time, her voice carried an edge. Legally, it belongs to Marcus and me now. We have the deed. I see. I looked at Marcus, this young man who had Louis's eyes and Louis's serious expression. And you think you deserve this place? I think Dad wanted us to have it, Marcus said simply. He spent 20 years of his life here with us. It's our family home. Our family home, not mine, not Dean's, theirs. What about the furniture, the personal items, the books Louis kept here? We'd be happy to let you take anything that has sentimental value, Sarah said graciously, as if she were doing me a favor by allowing me to claim remnants of my own husband's life. I walked slowly around the basement, seeing it now not as Louis's secret sanctuary, but as evidence of my own stupidity. How had I never questioned his monthly trips? How had I accepted 45 years of emotional distance as normal? There is one thing I don't understand, I said, stopping in front of the 3 of them. Why tell me any of this? Why not just let me sell the house to strangers and find out later that the sale was invalid? Dean and Sarah exchanged a look. Because, Dean said reluctantly, the house sale would have triggered a legal review, and there are other properties, other assets that would have come to light eventually. We thought it would be better if you heard it from us. Other properties? A cabin in Colorado, Marcus said. A small investment property in Florida. Dad was thorough in his planning. More secrets, more assets that had been hidden from me, transferred to his real family while I'd been worrying about the electric bill. How much? I asked. In total. How much did Louis give you over the years? Verna, Sarah said softly. I don't think those details matter now. They matter to me. Marcus looked at his mother, then at Dean, then back at me. About $2.4 million, counting the properties and the education fund and the direct transfers. $2.4 million. While I'd been clipping coupons and buying generic cereal, Louis had been secretly transferring the equivalent of my entire lifetime earnings to his other family. I felt something inside me break, but it wasn't my heart. My heart had broken yesterday when I first saw Sarah's photographs. This was something deeper. This was the last thread of respect I'd had for the man I'd married, the last trace of love I'd carried for 45 years. I want you all to leave, I said quietly. Mom, Dean started, but I held up my hand. I want you to leave, and I want you to understand something. I may be 68 years old, and I may have been foolish enough to trust my husband and my son, but I am not going quietly to Arizona to make your lives more convenient. What does that mean? Sarah asked, and for the first time she looked worried. I smiled, and I could feel the coldness in my own expression. It means you haven't seen the last of me, not by a long shot. I walked up the basement stairs without looking back, leaving the three of them to figure out what I meant. I didn't know yet myself, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being managed and manipulated. It was time for Verna Patterson to stop being patient. I drove home from the beach house in a haze of rage and humiliation, but underneath those familiar emotions, something new was growing. Purpose. For the first time in 45 years, I had a goal that belonged entirely to me. I was going to find out exactly what Louis had hidden from me, and I was going to use that knowledge to take back control of my own life. The safety deposit box at First National Bank was my first stop the next morning. The Arizona property deed was exactly where Louis's letter said it would be, along with several other documents that made my hands shake as I read them. The Arizona house wasn't a gift, it was a bribe. The deed showed that Louis had purchased it for $160,000, but there were strings attached. According to the legal documents, I could live there rent-free for the rest of my life, but I couldn't sell it, couldn't modify it, and when I died, it would revert to Marcus Chen. Even in death, Louis was controlling me, ensuring that I'd be grateful for his generosity while making sure his real heir ultimately inherited everything. But there was another document in the safety deposit box that Louis apparently hadn't told anyone about. A handwritten note dated just 2 weeks before his death. I have made so many mistakes, it began. I thought I was protecting everyone by keeping my two lives separate, but I was only protecting myself. Sarah deserves better than secrecy. Verna deserves better than lies. And both of them deserve better than a coward who was too selfish to choose. I read the note 3 times before its implications sank in. This wasn't the confident, controlling Louis who had orchestrated everyone's future from beyond the grave. This was a man wrestling with guilt, having second thoughts about the elaborate deception he'd constructed. The note continued. If something happens to me before I can make this right, the whole truth is hidden where only Verna will think to look. She knows me better than anyone, even if I never let her see the real me. Behind our wedding photo, in the hollow space I carved in the wall during our first year of marriage. She was the only one who knew about my hiding places then, before I learned to keep secrets from her too. I folded the note with trembling hands. Our wedding photo hung in the bedroom, the same spot it had occupied for 44 years. I dusted around it weekly, straightened it countless times when the house settled and knocked it crooked. but I'd never thought to look behind it. The drive home took forever. Every red light, every slow driver ahead of me felt like a deliberate obstacle. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were slick with nervous sweat. The wedding photo was heavier than I'd expected when I lifted it from its nail. Behind it, just as Lewis had written, was a small rectangular hole carved into the wall. Inside was a manila envelope, thick with documents. I carried everything to the kitchen table and spread it out under the bright fluorescent light. What I found there changed everything. Bank statements going back 5 years showed a very different financial picture than what Dean had described. The Pacific Coast Trust account I'd seen evidence of in the beach house basement was real, but it wasn't empty. The current balance was $1.8 million, and the account was held in trust with a very specific beneficiary, me. According to the documents, Lewis had set up the trust 3 months before his death. All the money he'd given to Sarah and Marcus over the years was being held in a separate account, intended as their inheritance only if I chose not to claim it. If I presented these papers to the bank, the entire amount would be transferred to my name immediately. But that wasn't the most shocking revelation in the envelope. There was a copy of Lewis's real will, dated just 1 week before his death. Not the version that left everything to Sarah and Marcus, and not the careful distribution that Dean had described. This will left everything to me, with a codicil that provided for Sarah and Marcus only if I chose to honor it. I have spent 20 years trying to live 2 lives, Lewis had written in the will's preamble, and I have succeeded only in cheating everyone I claimed to love. Verna has been denied the full attention and affection she deserved as my wife. Sarah has been denied the public acknowledgement she deserved as my partner. Marcus has been denied his rightful place as my acknowledged son. And Dean has been burdened with secrets that no child should have to carry. I sank into my kitchen chair, staring at the legal documents that turned everything I'd learned in the past 2 days upside down. Lewis hadn't planned to abandon me financially. He'd planned to give me the power to decide everyone's fate. But why hadn't Dean mentioned this will? Why had he and Sarah and Marcus presented me with such a different version of Lewis's intentions? The answer was in the final document in the envelope. A letter addressed to Dean, marked, "To be delivered only if Verna does not claim her inheritance within 60 days of my death." I opened it with hands that no longer trembled. Now I was just angry. "Dean," Lewis had written, "if you are reading this, it means that your mother has chosen to honor my original arrangements with Sarah and Marcus, rather than claim her full inheritance. I hope this means she has found peace with the truth and has decided to start fresh in Arizona. If so, you are to distribute the trust fund according to my previous instructions, ensuring that Sarah and Marcus have the security I always intended for them. However, if Verna has not claimed her inheritance simply because she is unaware of it, you are to give her this letter immediately and help her understand her options. The choice must be hers, freely made, not the result of incomplete information or manipulation." I set the letter down and looked at my phone. Dean had called twice this morning, leaving voicemails that I hadn't bothered to listen to. Now I played them back. "Mom, I know yesterday was overwhelming, but I hope you'll consider the Arizona option seriously. Sarah and Marcus really want to make this work for everyone." His voice was careful, measured, the tone of someone trying to manage a delicate situation. The second message was more urgent. "Mom, call me back. We need to talk about some of the legal details. I want to make sure you understand all your options." All my options. He knew about the trust fund. He knew about the real will. And he deliberately let me believe I was being discarded, abandoned, given the leftover scraps of Lewis's estate, while his father's real family inherited everything that mattered. My son had looked me in the eye and let me think I was worth nothing more than a pension and a small house, while he sat on evidence that I was actually Lewis's primary heir. I called Dean back. He answered on the first ring. "Mom, thank God. Are you okay? You left pretty abruptly yesterday." "Dean," I said, my voice calm and level, "I found your father's real will." Silence. I also found the trust fund documents, and the letter explaining what you were supposed to do if I didn't claim my inheritance. Mom, let me explain. You have been lying to me for the past 3 days. You, Sarah, and Marcus have been manipulating me into giving up an inheritance worth almost $2 million. It's not like that, Dean said, but his voice had lost its confident tone. We were trying to honor what Dad really wanted. What your father really wanted was for me to have the choice. That's why he set up the trust fund. That's why he wrote that letter to you. But you decided to take that choice away from me. You don't understand the whole situation, Dean said desperately. Sarah and Marcus have been depending on that money. Marcus still has graduate school to pay for. Sarah gave up her apartment, moved to the beach house believing it was hers. If you take the money now, you'll be destroying their lives. The way they destroyed mine? Mom, that's not fair. They never knew you existed until Dad got sick. They thought he was divorced, that you were his ex-wife who'd remarried and moved on. Sarah only found out you were still married when Dean and I had to list you as next of kin on Dad's medical forms. This was news to me. Sarah didn't know Louis was married? Not until the end. Dad told her he was divorced, that the separation had been amicable but final. She was as shocked as anyone to learn the truth. I felt something shift in my understanding of Sarah Chen. She hadn't been knowingly breaking up my marriage. She'd believed she was in a legitimate relationship with a divorced man. In her mind, I was the stranger, the complication, the woman who'd appeared out of nowhere to claim a dead ex-husband's estate. But Marcus knew, I said. Marcus was 5 when Dad first told him about having an older brother. But he said you and Dean lived far away, that it was complicated. Marcus grew up thinking of Dean as his half-brother from Dad's previous marriage. Previous marriage? Louis had told his second family that I was his past, not his present. He'd made Sarah believe she was his wife in everything but name, made Marcus believe he was Louis's acknowledged son. So when you all met in that basement yesterday, I said slowly, Sarah and Marcus thought they were meeting their ex-stepmother who was trying to claim money that rightfully belonged to them. Something like that, Dean admitted. I know it sounds complicated. It sounds like a massive fraud, Dean. Your father committed bigamy in every way except legally. He made financial promises to Sarah and Marcus that he funded by stealing from the marriage he had with me. He didn't steal from you, Mom. He earned that money during your marriage, but he was planning to leave it to you anyway. The trust fund proves that. The trust fund proves that he was trying to have it both ways. He wanted to promise Sarah and Marcus security while keeping me as a backup plan in case he changed his mind. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden Louis and I had planted together in our 2nd year of marriage. The roses were blooming, the ones he'd helped me choose because he said the pink ones reminded him of my blush when he complimented me. Had that been real? Any of it? Dean, I said finally, I want you to set up a meeting. All of us, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Mom, what are you planning? I'm planning to do what your father should have done 20 years ago. I'm going to tell the truth. I hung up before he could respond, then sat down to plan exactly what I was going to say to the woman who'd unknowingly stolen my husband and the young man who'd been raised to believe he was more important than me. But first, I had a phone call to make. Margaret answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and cheerful from her retirement community in Arizona. Verna! What a lovely surprise. How are you holding up, sweetheart? Margaret, I said, how would you feel about a house guest? Possibly a permanent one. Are you finally ready to get out of that old place and come live where the sun shines every day? Because, honey, I've been waiting for this call for years. I smiled for the first time since finding that basement shrine. I might be. But first, I have some business to finish here. Tomorrow, I would face Sarah and Marcus with the truth about Louis's deception. I would tell them that they'd been as manipulated as I had been, that we were all victims of a man who'd thought he could control everyone's lives even after his death. And then I would make the choice Louis had always been too much of a coward to make. I would decide what kind of ending this story deserved. The meeting took place at Sarah's house, the beach house that had been mine for 15 years before I knew anyone else existed. I arrived at exactly 10 o'clock, carrying Lewis's real will and the trust fund documents in a folder that felt heavier than it should. Sarah answered the door, wearing a simple blue dress that made her look younger than her 60-something years. Up close, without the shock of discovery clouding my vision, I could see what Lewis had seen in her. She had laugh lines around her eyes and calloused fingers that spoke of someone who worked with her hands. She was beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that came from living fully, not from careful maintenance. "Verna," she said, and her voice was warm but cautious. "Thank you for coming. Can I get you coffee? Tea?" Coffee would be nice. I followed her into the kitchen I'd never seen before, in a house I'd helped pay for but never been invited to visit. It was decorated simply but tastefully, with local art on the walls and books stacked on every available surface. This wasn't the lair of a husband-stealing manipulator. This was the home of a woman who'd thought she was building a life with the man she loved. Dean and Marcus were already seated at the small dining table. Marcus stood when I entered, and I was struck again by how much he looked like Lewis at that age. But where Lewis had carried himself with careful control, Marcus seemed more open, more genuinely at ease. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, offering his hand. "I'm glad we can talk." I shook his hand, studying his face. "Please, call me Verna. We're family, apparently. Complicated family, but family nonetheless." Sarah set a cup of coffee in front of me, and I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "Dean told us you found some additional documents." I did. I opened the folder and spread Lewis's real will across the table. "It seems your husband wasn't entirely honest with any of us about his final intentions." The three of them read in silence. I watched their faces as they processed the implications of what Lewis had actually planned. Sarah went pale. Marcus frowned in confusion. Dean looked like he wanted to disappear. "I don't understand," Marcus said finally. "This will is completely different from what Dad told us. This gives everything to Verna. With provisions for you and your mother only if I choose to honor them," I added. "Your father was hedging his bets. He wanted to promise you security while keeping his options open." Sarah looked up at me with eyes that held something I hadn't expected. Relief. "So we never had any legal right to this house," she said, "or to any of the money Lewis promised us." "No, you didn't." "I see." Sarah folded her hands in her lap, and I could see her mentally recalculating everything she'd believed about her future. "I suppose this changes everything." "It does," I agreed. "But probably not in the way you think." I reached into the folder and pulled out a second set of documents. "These are the trust fund papers. Lewis did set aside money for you and Marcus, but he structured it so that I would have the final say in how it was distributed." "How much?" Marcus asked quietly. $1.8 million. Marcus whistled low. "That's more than he ever told us about." "Your father was very good at keeping secrets from everyone," I said dryly. "But here's what I think really happened. Lewis was a coward who wanted to keep everyone happy without making any hard choices. He promised you a future while still keeping me as his legal wife. He set up financial arrangements that looked generous, but gave him the power to change his mind at any time. And when he finally got sick and realized he was running out of time to fix his mess, he decided to put all the responsibility on me." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. I pulled out the letter Lewis had written to Dean. He set it up so that I would be the villain either way. If I fought for my inheritance, I'd be the greedy wife stealing from his poor second family. If I gave up my inheritance, I'd be the noble woman who graciously stepped aside for true love. Either way, he got to die with his reputation intact while leaving me to deal with the consequences. Dean shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, Dad was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly toward the end." "Your father was thinking very clearly," I replied sharply. He just wasn't thinking about anyone but himself. I looked around the table at the three people whose lives had been shaped by Lewis's selfishness. But I didn't come here to blame any of you. You were all manipulated by him just as much as I was. What are you saying? Sarah asked. I'm saying that Lewis may have created this mess, but we don't have to let it define the rest of our lives. I took a deep breath. Sarah, you gave up your apartment and moved here believing this house was yours. Marcus, you've been planning a future based on an inheritance you thought was guaranteed. Dean, you've been carrying secrets that were never yours to bear. I pulled out one final document from the folder. This is a quitclaim deed that I had drawn up yesterday afternoon. I'm signing the beach house over to you, Sarah. Legally and completely. No strings attached. Sarah's eyes widened. Verna, I can't accept that. Not after what Lewis put you through. Yes, you can. Because this house was never really mine anyway. It was Lewis's escape from me. His sanctuary with you. You've made it into a home. I never could have done that. But the money, Marcus started. The trust fund stays as Lewis intended it. You'll have your college money, and Sarah will have enough to live comfortably here for the rest of her life. But I'm restructuring it so that Lewis's conditions don't apply anymore. You won't have to worry about me changing my mind or holding your future hostage. What about you? Dean asked. Mom, you'll be giving up almost $2 million. I smiled, and for the first time in days it felt genuine. I'll be fine. I'm keeping the investments Lewis made in my name, which is more than enough for me to live well. And I'm taking that little house in Arizona. You're moving to Arizona? Sarah asked, and I was surprised to hear something like disappointment in her voice. I am. I called my sister Margaret yesterday, and she's thrilled to have me closer. I'll be near family who actually wants me around, and I'll finally have the chance to figure out who Verna Patterson is when she's not defined by being Lewis's wife. Marcus looked confused. But why are you being so generous to us? We're the reason your marriage was a lie. No, Marcus. Lewis is the reason my marriage was a lie. You and your mother were just trying to build a life with the information you had. None of us deserved to be lied to. I stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the dunes. I spent 45 years waiting for Lewis to choose me, waiting for him to love me the way he was capable of loving. Yesterday, I realized that he did choose me, in his way. He chose to keep me safe and comfortable while he lived his real life elsewhere. I was his security blanket, his backup plan, his convenient arrangement. I turned back to face them. I don't want to be anyone's backup plan anymore. I want to be someone's first choice, even if that someone is just me. Sarah stood up and walked over to me. Verna, I need you to know something. When Lewis told me about you in those last weeks after he got sick, he didn't talk about you like you were a burden or an obligation. He talked about you like he was proud of you. He said you were stronger than he'd ever given you credit for, that you deserved better than what he'd given you. Did he ever consider leaving you to come back to me? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Yes, he thought about it. But he said it was too late, that he'd hurt you too much already. He was afraid you'd never forgive him. He was probably right about that. But you're forgiving us. I considered her words. I'm not forgiving you because you don't need my forgiveness. You fell in love with a man who told you he was free to love you back. You raised a son who thought his father was proud of him. You built a relationship based on the truth as you knew it. I looked at Marcus, who was watching our conversation with serious attention. And you, Marcus, you're not responsible for your father's choices. You're 24 years old with your whole life ahead of you. Don't let Lewis's cowardice define who you become. What about Dean? Sarah asked. He knew the truth and kept it from you. I looked at my son, who was staring at the table with the expression of someone who wished he could disappear. Dean made his choice when he was 20 years old and scared of losing his father. I don't agree with what he did, but I understand it. Mom, Dean said quietly, I'm sorry. I should have told you years ago. Yes, you should have. But you didn't. and we can't change that now. What we can do is decide how we move forward. I walked back to the table and began gathering up the documents. I'm flying to Arizona next week to look at houses near Margaret. The legal papers for the house transfer and the trust fund restructuring will be ready by then. Sarah, you'll have full ownership of this place, and Marcus, you'll have guaranteed access to your education fund. What about Christmas? Marcus asked suddenly. And birthdays and family stuff? Are we just never going to see each other again? The question surprised me. I'd been thinking about legal documents and financial arrangements, not about the strange family bonds we'd accidentally formed. I don't know, I said honestly. This is all new territory for me. But Marcus, if you ever want to visit an old lady in Arizona, I think I'd like that. You could tell me about college, about what you want to do with your life. I never got to know Louis as a young man, but I think I'd enjoy getting to know you. Marcus smiled, and it was like seeing Louis's smile without the weight of secrets behind it. I'd like that too. Sarah walked me to the door when I was ready to leave. Verna, she said as I reached for the handle. Are you sure about this? About giving up the money and the house? You could fight for everything. You'd probably win. I could, I agreed. But winning would mean spending the rest of my life tied to this mess, fighting legal battles, proving my worth to people who should have valued me from the beginning. I'd rather be poor and free than rich and trapped. You're not poor, Sarah pointed out. Louis's other investments will keep you comfortable. That's true. But more importantly, I'm not trapped anymore. For the first time in 45 years, I get to decide what comes next. I drove away from the beach house with the windows down, letting the salt air blow through my hair. In my rearview mirror, I could see Sarah standing on the porch, watching me go. She raised her hand in a small wave, and I found myself waving back. 3 weeks later, I was sitting on the porch of my new house in Arizona, watching the sunrise paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and pink. Margaret lived just 10 minutes away, and we'd already established a routine of morning walks and afternoon bridge games. My phone rang as I was finishing my first cup of coffee in my new kitchen. It was Marcus. Verna? I hope it's not too early to call. It's never too early for good news, I said, though I wasn't sure what news he might have. I got accepted to graduate school, full funding for my master's in education. I start in the fall. Marcus, that's wonderful. Your father would have been so proud. Actually, Marcus said, I was hoping you might be proud too. I know it's weird, but you're the closest thing to a grandmother I've got, and I wanted to share the news with family. I felt tears prick at my eyes. I am proud of you. So very proud. After we hung up, I sat on my porch for a long time, thinking about family and choice and the strange ways life can surprise you when you stop trying to control it. Louis had thought he was giving me a choice when he set up that trust fund, when he wrote those careful letters explaining my options. But he was wrong. The real choice wasn't about money or houses or inheritance. The real choice was about who I wanted to be when I finally stopped being Louis Patterson's wife. I chose freedom. I chose fresh air and desert sunrises and a sister who was genuinely happy to see me. I chose phone calls from a young man who wanted to share his victories with someone who cared. I chose myself, finally and completely. And for the first time in 68 years, that felt like more than enough. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.